أكثرهم يسمعون أو يعقلون إن هم إلا كالأنعام بل هم أضل سبيلا ألم تر إلى ربك كيف مد الظل ولو شاء لجعله ساكنا ثم جعلنا الشمس عليه دليلا ثم قبضناه إلينا قبضا يسيرا وهو الذي جعل لكم الليل لباسا والنوم سباتا وجعل النهار نشورا وهو الذي أرسل الرياح بشرا بين يدي رحمته وأنزلنا من السماء ماء طهورا لنحيي به بلدة ميتا ونسقيه مما خلقنا أنعاما وأناسيا كثيرا ولقد صرفناه بينهم ليذكروا فأبى أكثر الناس إلا كفورا ولو شئنا لبعثنا في كل قرية نذيرا فلا تطع الكافرين وجاهدهم به جهادا كبيرا صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah khair, Brother Abdurrahim, for the beautiful recitation. As it was planned, we were supposed to start at 7 and we're starting at 7. So please give a lot of salawat for Shaykh.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Again, for the well-being of the community and others, salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم به نستعين. الحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكره وسببا للمزيد من فضله ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الإنسان خلق هلوعا إذا مسه الشر جزوعا وإذا مسه الخير منوعا إلا المصلين الذين هم على صلاتهم دائمون. صدق الله علي العظيم. السلام عليكم جميع المؤمنين والمؤمنات. Inshallah, first and foremost, I request a Surah Fatiha for Sister Sosan Al-Hajj, who recently passed away. She's the sister of one of our dear community members, Sister Lina Omais. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah. 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 Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant her a place in paradise. especially seeing that she passed away in this blessed month of Ramadan. Inshallah, we will continue our discussion on the obstacles which we may face in devoting our focus within our prayer, within our salat, and also within our dua. And this discussion, as we mentioned, is an important discussion, especially as these blessed nights of the nights of Qadr, nights of destiny are upon us, and inshallah, everyone will be engaged in ibadah, dua, and the salat. First and foremost, inshallah, to gain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then to have our needs granted. And of course, among those pressing needs that we should also pray for in this blessed month of Ramadan is the return of Imam al-Zaman Ajjal Faraj al-Sharif. That he may establish justice in this world as it has been filled with injustice. Yesterday we spoke about this same topic, but more so from many of the various rawayat of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wassalam. And then we reached to a point where we wanted to discuss the same topic of the obstacles that hinder us from focus within our salat, even focus within our dua. That focus, which we can also understand as our connection as well to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while we are making our salat or even making our dua. And we were examining this from one of the du'as of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi afdal salatu wassalam. Dua Abu Hamza Thamali, which is a dua which Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi afdal salatu wassalam, he recited every morning in the blessed month of Ramadan, one that is recommended for us also to recite in every morning of the blessed month of Ramadan. So from that we understand that if we are to recite this dua, these points that Imam Ali ibn Hussein Zain al-Abidin alayhi afdal salatu wassalam is making is a point of how do we focus in our salat, how do we focus in our dua, in our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we started yesterday, but as I'm looking and I counted through the different things which are mentioned in this dua, which may serve as a barrier, may serve as a hindrance of us connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, connecting to our dua. There are 10 things that are mentioned. Yesterday we only mentioned the first thing, and I'll just repeat that. And those who have heard it, inshallah, this is a good reminder for you. As one part of that dua, it begins where Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi afdal salatu wassalam, he speaks about standing up in prayer. That, you know, Allahumma inni kullama qultu qad tahiyya'tu wa ta'abba'tu wa qumtu lis-salat bayna yadayk. So it's that every time that I come forth to stand before you, to pray before you, O Allah, and to make my munajat, in other words, even the munajat is the dua. So when I come to pray, when I come to make my dua, he says, I'm affected by tiredness, a nu'as. I become tired. In other words, I begin this salat or I begin this thing and I just don't feel as if I want to do it. I'm not as enthusiastic to do it. And sometimes, we face that. Sometimes we may be in the nights of Qadr and it's like, oh, well, we're going to do this because, this is the custom. This is what we have to do. This is what we're used to doing. So even if we're tired, we're coming and we're making that salat. We're not enthusiastic about that salat. We're just, this is what we have to do. Or perhaps we even have this idea that, oh, well, you know what? I need to do this because this is the night of Qadr. And because it's a night of Qadr, then, I have all these needs. We perhaps made our list, 1, 2, 3, all these things. And so in order to reach that thing, I need to make sure that I'm making the salat or making this dua. But if we truly pay attention to our state, we don't have that state of, that, we're really enthusiastic about doing it. I gave one of the examples of one of our great ulama, Ayatollah Khunsari, who was buried beside Allama Tabatabai in Qom. If you go to the shrine of Hazrat Ma'suma Salam alayha, then the grave of Allama Tabatabai is in the corner, and right beside him is Ayatollah Khunsari. And Ayatollah Khunsari, he is someone that, again, he looked at his salat, and then he would look at the salat of the Ahlul Bayt. How does the Ahlul Bayt make their salat? How they're connected to their salat? And so, he began to, for every salat he made a qada of it. Not that he missed the salat, but he was like, oh, you know what? I made the salat, but what really is the value of that salat? And he was someone who was known to study quite often, and even some of the ulama, they would say that, whenever they see him, he's either sitting, he's reading a book, he's writing, and they would ask him, he says, do you ever get tired? He said, yes, I get tired of reading these books. And he says, so then I stand up and I make salat. This is when I make salat, this gives me energy. Most of us, when we go to salat, as Imam Zain al-Abidin say, we get up for salat, we're like, oh, do I want to do it? Do I have the patience to do it? So he says that this is the state. And why do we have the state? Why are we not focusing? Why are we unable to connect in our salat and even in our munajat, our du'as to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Especially sometimes we, begin to recite Jura Joshan Kabir, and everyone's like, oh, well, when is this going to finish? How fast does the reciter recite? Because if you recite slow, it's going to take maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. It's like, subhanAllah. So Imam Zain al-Abidin, the first thing he says, that لَعَلَّكَ رَأَيْتَنِي مُسْتَخِفًا بِحَقِّكِ, that perhaps, Ya Allah, because I don't take your rights serious, I take them lightly. And because of that, this is the state I'm in, that I haven't truly understood your rights and observed those rights. And of course, those rights are, you have some rights which are exclusively for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like anything that is wajib. Our salat, our fasting, our hajj, homes, whatever those things which are wajibat, yes, those are the haqq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But also, as I gave the example as well, that haqqun nas is also one of the haqq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, in one aspect of it, it's the right of a person. That, this person entrusted me with an amanat, and now I have to return this. And if I don't, yes, this person is going to be upset with me, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to forgive it until that person forgives it. But one of the things that we have to understand as well, that haqqun nas has one aspect of it too, which is also haqqullah. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one who tells us in the Quran that the believer is one who, if he makes a pact, he honors that pact. If he takes an amanat, he gives the ada of that amanat. He takes care of that amanat, what he or she has been entrusted with. One of those haqq is very beautiful that Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, he mentions, and is connected also to this blessed month of Ramadan. He says, "Man mana'a haqqan lillah azza wa jalla anfaqa fi batilin mithlay." He says that whoever withholds a right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that person will give something fi batil. He will give, or he will pay, or in other words, he will spend money twice as much in what? In something that's invalid. And why is this connected? Because this hadith is actually categorized in Babu Zakat, when Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi wasallam, he's speaking to Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam, he's speaking to one of his companions, Hisham ibn Hakam, or close companions of Imam Sadiq alayhi wasallam. And he says that those individuals who don't give that haqq the way it should be, and unfortunately sometimes every year we get this, that Ramadan is over, the zakatul fitr is wajib before the salat of zakat, before the salat of Eid. But it, without fail, I've yet seen, subhanAllah, to see that we have a year where we don't have people paying zakatul fitr 3 months after, 4 months after. It's like, subhanallah. I said, this zakat is supposed to be given before you make the Salatul Eid. Before you make the Salatul Eid. But sometimes, again, it's paid, mashallah. Persons fulfilled their duty and obligation. But as Imam Zaynul Abidin, he says, what? Mustakhifan bihaqqillah. Ya Allah, you saw me that I'm not taking your haqq serious. So it'll come to, oh, I delayed my salat. Mr. Fajr, oh, I'll get up and I'll make the qadha of it. You know, alhamdulillah, you make the wajib, and you should make the wajib. And there's ajr in that, there's sawab in that. But the ajr in that, it's not like when you make it on time and in the time. Oh, I pay my zakatul fitr 6 months later. It's like, mashallah, this is haqqullah, that he obligates the zakat on one aspect. And the other aspect is haqqun nas. Why? Because the zakatul fitr goes to those individuals who are mustahiq, who are in need. And so you delay it, and then they also may fall into trouble or difficulties. Why? Because you've taken that right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lightly. The second thing that Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi wa salatu wasalam, he mentions, he says, أَوْ لَعَلَّكَ رَأَيْتَنِي مُعْرِضًا عَنْكَ, that perhaps, Ya Allah, you saw me objecting to you. Of course, the Quran is very beautiful, very clear, and then, mashallah, it wasn't planned, but this ayat that was recited from Surah Furqan by our brother Abdul Rahim, very beautiful. That first verse that he recited, he says that, again, this is the position of some of the mushrikeen. They say, oh, well, Ya Allah, how come you didn't send angels to us? You sent it to the Prophet. How come you didn't send it to us? And perhaps, you give us the revelation. And but the verse, it starts, those individuals, لا يرجو لقاء Allah. They don't really want to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meet to Allah, but they are objecting. That, you know what? If the angels came to us, then perhaps we would believe. Perhaps we would follow. Perhaps we would, follow in this path. Why did you send it to this person? That's i'tirad on Allah. And of course, that comes from someone who doesn't believe, but sometimes they haven't even with believers. Maybe not to that extent or not in that direction. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gives us a very beautiful example within the Quran. And that is the example between Musa and Khidr. Again, we know the story, I don't need to repeat it. But Khidr says, again, he had a knowledge that Musa didn't have. Musa, alayhi salam, he's ulul azm. That his sharia is for everyone. But Khidr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a very particular knowledge of the batin, of an inner aspect. And so therefore Khidr, he was to obey what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to do. Even if it apparently, the ulul azm, the Nabi ulul, couldn't understand it. Khidr was like, this is what I need to do. And Khidr, he told Musa, he says, listen, he was like, you won't be patient with me. And don't object. But each time, we'll say he was objecting. Oh, why did you do this? Oh, why did you do that? To the point Khidr was like, okay, هذا فراق بيني وبينك. Sometimes this happens. And again, this is a point that I see that as well, sometimes we, may read the book of our marja, or we find the fatwa of our marja says, look, this is what we should do. This is your action. Your responsibility, your obligation is this, 1, 2, 3. Again, and this marja, he's not making it up from himself. Because of course he knows that on Yawm al-Qiyamah, that his neck is on the line. His neck is on the line. So he gives a fatwa, and sometimes we look at this fatwa and say, oh, well, why did he make that fatwa? Why do we have to do this? Why is it this way instead of that way? Sometimes when if a person's asking the question, I just want to understand maybe a bit of the, the philosophy behind it, a bit of the wisdom behind it, the hikmah behind it, that's one thing. But if the objection is that, well, why do we have to do it this way? And not that way. Oh, this way seems difficult. Do they not know better, or can I? SubhanAllah. The place from where they bring this fatwa is from the Quran. and from the Sunnah of Rasulullah. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And this is not to say that they're ma'asum, no. This is why we need Imam Zaman Ajfari Sharif. But in that time of ghaiba, this is the command of Imam Zaman Ajfari Sharif. He says, and he gave particular qualities that follow someone who knows the Quran and knows our Sunnah, and they have taqwa Allah, they're not after dunya. There's a whole list of those criterions. And those criterions are quite often when you open the book of your marja and you list, like, what is the criterion of a marja at-taqleed? These are directly from the hadith of Imam Zaman Ajfari Sharif. But yet we say, oh, why does this marja do this? So we're objecting to the marja, which means we're objecting to Imam Zaman Ajfari Sharif. And if we're objecting to Imam Zaman, we're objecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is one of the things that, as Imam Zayn al-Abidin says, it affects our salat, our connection, it affects our in dua. So, وجدتني رأيتني معرضا عنك فقليتني. So you've scorned me, you've pushed me away. ووجدتني في مقام الكاذبين. Oh, and some of the nuskha or some of the churches, في مقام الكذابين. That you've found me being among those who are not truthful. Those who are not truthful. We make false promises, which, oh, hey, I'm going to do this, and when it comes time to fulfill that promise or fulfill that thing which we said, we're not found. And we may think it's just a simple matter. Even in English we have this saying, oh, well, it's a little lie, or it's a white lie. But that dishonesty, it affects our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It affects our connection in our dua, as Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi wasallam, he's pointing to. The fourth thing that the Imam he mentions, he says, أَوْ لَعَلَّكَ رَأَيْتَنِي غَيْرَ شَاكِرٍ لِنَعْمَائِكَ. Or perhaps you found me ungrateful for your blessings. فَحَرَمْتَنِي. And so therefore you have now prevented me. You've deprived me of those blessings. Why? Because I've been ungrateful. You've given me your ni'mah, your blessings, your barakah, but I'm ungrateful. And sometimes, again, this quite often, as I said, I'm repeating this because it happens so often. Sometimes, especially, we may be making our du'as for our needs, our hawajat in the night of Qadr, and then we may have something very specific in mind. I mentioned a very beautiful hadith in Salat al-Jumu'ah about this. We may have something very specific. Oh Allah, give me this, I want that, I want this. So it may not be in our best interest, in our maslahah. And if it's not in our interest, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that, oh, you know what, if this person gets this, then it's going to take them off of the path. So instead of that, I'm going to give them something alternative, something that is different, slightly different, but is better for this person. And we may have this thing and we're ungrateful. Oh, why wasn't that? This is also one of those objections as well. That we object to Allah. Allah, I asked for this, you gave me that. Or this happened. Rather than understanding, oh, well, maybe there was something in the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, I wanted this thing, it's not quite that, it's close, but it's not quite that. So that's one of the ways that sometimes we are ungrateful for the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then what happens? فَحَرَمْتَنِي. And then after that, we make dua, it's like, no, this person's ungrateful. Even if we give them, they're not going to be grateful. They're not going to be thankful for that. And one of the beauty, and I'll just mention this point because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in the Quran, sometimes being grateful for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessing, His ni'mah, as He says, فَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَتِكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Sometimes it means that, oh, hey, we have to show the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to display the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I've seen this happen before. Sometimes a person has the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, some sort of ni'mah. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Surah Ma'arij, what we read in the beginning, He says, وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. That if some good, some blessing befalls or comes in the hands of this servant of Allah, manu'a, they withhold it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَتِكَ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Show the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes that means that blessing, that ni'mah, that barakah, means that we have to spread it to our family. Sometimes it means, oh, hey, even beyond that, even sometimes to our community. Just depending on whatever it is. And sometimes we will, from our du'as, we should know what that is. So if we are not grateful for that blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He gives us, then at times it will be withheld. أو لعلك فقدتني في مجالس العلماء. سبحان الله. فخذلتني. Or perhaps, Allah, you've seen me absent in the gatherings of the ulama, the scholars. So therefore you have abandoned me. And many of the du'as that we have, and especially some of the du'as we have in the blessed month of Ramadhan, there's a statement we say that, Allah, la takilni ila nafsi tarafatan abada. That, oh Allah, never leave me alone to myself, to my own vices. That my wakil is only me. That I have no place to turn to like if I'm struggling or if I'm having difficulties to connecting to you, I have no outlet. That you just leave me by myself. La takilni ila nafsi tarafatan abada. And sometimes when we get into that state that, oh, well, I have no place to turn, I have no place to kind of seek advice or some place to, especially spiritual advice, that, look, what do I need to do? How do I correct myself? And so Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he says, this is also one of those points, one of those barriers that prevents us from connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Focusing in our salat, focusing in our dua, and connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because we've left the majalis al-ulama. We've left the advice of the ulama. Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayhi, when he was giving advice to, I believe it was his daughter-in-law, when she was asking about, well, how do I purify myself? How do I go on this path of connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? One of those things that he advised her, he said that, listen, make sure that you're always connected to the words of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wassalam, and the advice of the ulama. Says that the words of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wassalam, again, the ahadith of Rasulullah, the ahadith of the Amir al-Mu'mineen, Fatima al-Zahra, Imam Zaman. This is always connect to that. But then also the advice of the ulama, again, because some of the rawayat, again, whether they are authentic or not authentic, the ulama have studied this. They have understood that, oh yes, this is reliable, this is not reliable. And sometimes they even simplify the advice that we find in the words of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wassalam. So Imam Khomeini, he says that make sure that you always stay close to the words of the Ahlul Bayt and the advice of the ulama. And he says, and if among those ulama, he says, you don't know anyone who is an arif billah. Yeah. And he says, but he's perhaps an ustad of akhlaq or this. He says, take that. And then of course he gives the advice of reading the book of Malik Tabrizi. One of the books that I told Malik Tabrizi that he wrote was about connecting in the salat, the asrar of salat, the secrets of the salat. That, inshallah, that if we know that, then we will understand how to connect within our salat. That advice that we see that even many of the ulama themselves, they take, that to always stick close to the advice of the ulama, the lessons that they may teach, maybe a hadith that, oh, I haven't heard this before, or this, just these gems that sometimes and I'm not talking about myself, but again, we have great ulama, that the gems that they give. One of those things was, even recently I came and I read and it was very beautiful, very beautiful. Ayatollah Hassan Zaramli, rahmatullah alayh, that he says when he was studying, he said that, he would go to the dars of Allama Sha'arani. Allama Sha'arani, Ayatollah Sha'arani. He taught philosophy, he taught other things. But he said that, this is Allama Sha'arani, he says he'd never had a break in his lesson, he said, except for 2 breaks. He says only 2 times in a year he would take a break from teaching. He says, it was on the day of Ashura. He says, and then the birthday of Imam Hassan Mujtaba. He says, other than that, he says, every day he was teaching us that we would come and Ayatollah Hassan Zaramli, rahmatullah alayh, he would go to the house of Allama Sha'arani, rahmatullah alayh. To the point that one day, he said it rained, it snowed. He said it was very heavy snow in Tehran. Very heavy snow. He said the snows was even above their knees. And he was wondering that, should I go or shouldn't I go? He said he contemplated for a bit because they had a class like kind of after Fajr. So, like about an hour or so after Fajr, hour or 2 after Fajr. So he's contemplating after he made his Fajr, he was like, should I go or shouldn't I go? Then he's like, you know what, I'm going to go. So he tracked through the snow. Took miles to go to the house of, about a mile and a half or so, to the house of Allama Sha'arani. And then finally when he reached, he said he stood outside the door and he was contemplating. He says, well, I'm not sure if anyone else came or not. He said, at least because he didn't see any other tracks, he was like, did any other student come or, what's going on? Is he going to be waiting or is he not waiting? So he said, finally after a couple minutes of, contemplating, and also it was getting cold outside, he knocks on the door of his teacher, Allama Sha'arani. So Allama Sha'arani comes, opens the door, invites him in, and they sit down as normal. Then he tells Allama Sha'arani, he was like, I had doubt whether I should come or not. He says, why did you have doubt? He's like, well, the snow and all this. He says, when you were coming, he says, did you see beggars on the street? Was there anyone who was, who in need, who was out there on the streets? Maybe. And so he's like, why? He says, no, tell me, was there anyone there? And so I told Hassan, he says, yes. He says, there were people there. He says that when they're not taking a break or vacationing from seeking their need, he says, you as a talib al-ilm, someone who's seeking on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the path of Rasulullah, the path of Ahlul Bayt, that why are you taking your break? Just come, sit. And he says, it was only Hassan Zaramli, and he gave the lesson like normal, like there was, as you should. The 6th thing that Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi afdal wasalam, he warns us of that may prevent us and hinder us in our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أو لعلك رأيتني في الغافلين فمن رحمتك آيستني. That perhaps you saw me among those who are heedless, who has a ghafla. And that ghafla can come into many aspects of our life. That we are ghafil or we are heedless of the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're heedless. We think, oh, you know what? Yeah, Allah sees me when I'm in a masjid, but I'm out at this place or that place, and where's Allah? But ghafla, it affects us. That we are heedless of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or we're heedless of our duty and responsibility to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our duty and our responsibility to humanity, to the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes we become heedless even of our own self, our own nafs, our own weaknesses at times. And then we don't even try to correct those things. We're like, well, this is who I am. That's being a ghafil. It's not that, hey, I'm doing something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is displeased with. Oh, this is who I am. Oh, this is my habit. I've been doing this for so long that rather than saying, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like this. This is something I need to change. So don't be ghafil even of yourself. Don't be ghafil of eternity, our next life. That we're only here for what? How many years? Some 20 years. Some don't even make it past 1 year. Baby's born and it's gone. Some are here 30 years, 50 years. Some are 100 years. But as Allama Tabatabai, he says that he would always give his students this advice. He says, look, and I'll say it in Farsi, it has a kind of a sweetness in that way. He says, Ma abad darat pish darim. He says, we have eternity before us. And if we are ghafil, if we are heedless of that eternity, that eternal life before us, then we're not going to prepare for it. And quite often, this is one of the things that we're ghafil of. We think, oh, well, as long as we're here, we have to, build this life, maybe sure we get a good house, good car, our 401k has to be this or this. But what are we putting for that world? Which is not going to be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 80 years, 100 years. It's eternal. I bet it's forever. And if we're ghafil of that, then we're not going to prepare for it. So, and that advice of Allama Tabatabai, remember that we have eternity ahead of us. The seventh thing that Imam Zain al-Abidin, he mentions, he says, أو لعلك رأيتني آلف مجالس البطالين سبحان الله فبيني وبينهم خليتني. He says, perhaps you've seen me, Ya Allah, that I enjoy the gatherings of, again, those individuals who are heedless, those individuals who are, everything is just vain. That, I enjoy this. And this is not to say that you shouldn't have fun. Imam Rida alayhi, he says, one of the things that helps you with your ibadah is that you have a moment, you specify a time among your times that you're having fun. That is halal. But those who are battaleen, again, no thought about the akhirah or their actions or the repercussions of their actions. So, Ya Allah, you found me, then I'm among them and I'm enjoying myself. I'm having fun. They're not reminding me of my salat, my fast, or reminding me of nothing. So Allah, what happened? You left me among them. Why? Because I didn't want to turn away from them. Or I didn't want to bring in an element of your remembrance. And, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give 1,000 barakah, 1,000 barakahs to one of our dear friends in Qom. I believe, inshallah, he's still living. But, we call him Jawad Ahlul Bayt. His name was Jawad, but we call him Jawad al-Ahlul Bayt. Because every time we would sit down, so, again, we would go to our dars, we would come back from our dars, and then we would sit in the room of one of our friends, and, we would have some tea or some coffee, and we would talk. But Jawad Ahlul Bayt, he always said that, look, before we part ways, is everybody recite a hadith from Rasulullah or from the Ahlul Bayt. He said, so that our sitting is not in vain. Yes, we sit, we enjoy our time, we had some laughs, told some funny things, but he says, but before we part, he says, everybody has to recite. He says, and don't worry, if you recite it this last time, he says, no problem. You recite that same hadith. If you don't know any other hadith, recite it 1,000 times. But as long as we are making sure that this gathering that we have has the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and remembrance of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afsalatu wasalam. And I remember this without fail. He would even block the door. Nope. You got to give a hadith before you leave. You got to say something, or ayat al-Quran, something before you left this sitting. So if we're in that kind of gathering that no mentioning of Allah, no mentioning of the Ahlul Bayt, and we're enjoying that, this is Allah. God forbid that we're just left in that company and it brings about and sows within ourselves heedlessness. أو لعلك, the eighth thing that Imam Zayn al-Abidin mentions, أو لعلك لم تحب أن تسمع دعائي فباعدتني, or perhaps, Ya Allah, you don't like to hear my voice, my dua. Subhanallah, Subhanallah. That's very weighty to think about, that Allah doesn't want to hear my dua. He doesn't want to hear my voice. That what person has reached that state that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like, oh, you know, of course he doesn't close his ear, but no, this person, is it because of their complaints or their needs they just constantly want, but they don't come towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Again, just, we only have a few minutes, but one of the things I would say, maybe perhaps a good remedy for that, is that we begin our dua with salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And we end our du'as with salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Because that is a dua that Allah will hear. That is a dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will listen to. He says in the Quran, إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. And the importance of that as well, that one of our ulama, he says that, he was like, if there's anything, he says, I don't know about my salatul layl, that whether it's accepted or not. He says, but I know that when I make this, at least one part of that salat is accepted. He says, and that may just simply be enough. One part of that salatul layl may be accepted. He says, and that's when I recite the salawat in my salat. He says, that's the only thing that I have certainty about, that in my salat or salatul layl, this Muslim salat, that it is accepted. He says, the rest of it, I rely on the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ninth thing that Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi hafizahullah, he tells us that in this very beautiful dua, that perhaps it becomes one of those things that hinders us from connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within our salat or our dua. أو لعلك بجرمي وجريرتي كافيتني, that perhaps you're reprimanding me because of my disobedience. Perhaps you're reprimanding me, Ya Allah, that I'm not able to connect to you in my salat, I'm not able to be focused, I'm not able to be focused in my dua because of my sins, because of my shortcomings, and not even making any efforts to change those things. And unfortunately, sometimes we come to that point within our du'as and our connection. Each year, mashallah, alhamdulillah, that we've been blessed. And this is a ni'mah. We're blessed to have this blessed month of Ramadan come upon us again. Inshallah, if we're all living also in the night of Qadr, we are blessed to actually even to experience that night. But then one of the questions is, and this is one of the things, and this is why many of the ulama that on the nights of Qadr, they take a moment. Yes, they are engaged in the dua and the ibadat. But even someone says, one of the best ibadahs is simply to take a moment to be alone, to be in seclusion, and to truly think about your actions and your state, your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That from this night of Qadr that I've been blessed with in this year, has my state changed since last year? Or am I still in the same position? Am I still asking for forgiveness for the same mistakes, the same atrocities that I made last year, coming into the blessed month of Ramadan and the night of Qadr, and again in this night of Qadr, then I have to ask for the same forgiveness? If so. But that tells us that, well, what have we been doing for that entire year. In fact, in the words of Ayatul Shu'ara, he says that, if we usually count our age by years. He says, but if we haven't made any movement, he says, because how do we calculate the days? He says, the sun revolves around. So he says, there's a movement, there's a haraka. He says, but if we haven't actually moved, meaning that our state of being, our nas, has not even moved, made any haraka, made any movement, he says, then we haven't really aged. In other words, aged spiritually. Our spiritual maturity has not aged. Yeah, maybe physically we've aged 80, 90, but then our spiritual state, we may be 5 years old. Because that's how much we moved over 80 years in our spirituality. And this is what Imam Zayn al-Abidin is saying, that لَعَلَّكَ بِجُرْمِي وَجَرِيرَتِي كَافِيتَنِي. That because of my sins, because my absence of moving towards you, Ya Allah, then yes, I can't connect. I can't stay focused in my salah. I can't stay focused in my dua. And the last thing that Imam Zayn al-Abidin mentions, he says, أَوْ لَعَلَّكَ بِقِلَّةِ حَيَائِي مِنْكَ جَازَيْتَنِي. Or perhaps you're repaying me for my lack of modesty. Again, my lack of modesty, my lack of sincerity and connection to you, Allah. And because of that, then yes, I don't connect the way I should. One of the beauties about the blessed month of Ramadan, and I'll end with this, because the salat is upon us, that one of the aspects of Ramadan, of fasting, it instills within us modesty, haya, iffa. It is something that, again, it suppresses our low selves. But throughout the year, do we hold on to that modesty that we find in the blessed month of Ramadan? Or is it just there because, hey, I'm hungry, don't have much energy, so... No, this is a quality that we should take with us even beyond the blessed month of Ramadan, so that we may connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only in this blessed month, which there's no month like it, but even in each and every month. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا واقضي حوائجنا واشف مرضانا وارحم أمواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان وجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه وتحت لواء بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين. Just bring it to the floor.